top line, it is like a triple win. As an economist, I've honestly never seen anything that's so positive and a change.
The pandemic forced people around the world to start working from home, and for many, it has become the new normal. Well, new research shows that remote working has some very real upsides.
So firms are up, employees are happier on average, and actually society seems to gain because it reduces pollution from commuting and lets parents spend more time with kids. I'm Nick Bloom. I'm a professor of economics at Stanford University in California.
Nick Bloom began looking into the potential impact of a workforce that doesn't commute every day long before the pandemic launched the idea into the mainstream. And now there's data that proves just how productive and profitable working from home can be. Journalist Rhoda Metcalf caught up with Nick Bloom, virtually of course, to talk about the virtues of remote work.
Right up until the pandemic, I think it's fair to say that most employers were pretty dubious about how much work their employees would do working from home. But now we've had this huge experiment. So what do we know about how productive most people are when they work from home?
Yes, pre-pandemic, there was broad skepticism. So people would say working from home, shirking from home, or working remotely working.
Right.
I've been working from home for 20 years, so
Wow.
I experienced a lot of that. The pandemic kind of blew this all away. So I tell you what we know from now, a lot of studies, including I had a paper actually in Nature about 2 months ago, a huge randomized control trial. What we find is for hybrid, which is the most common, probably most listeners are doing that. So hybrid is like, I'm in the office Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. I'm at home Monday, Friday. That looks like it's about flat on productivity.
You break even on productivity.
Yes, so hybrid is neither positive or negative on productivity. I want to come back to talk about profitability, which is different and is what you should care about for a business. But on productivity, it's about flat.
So why is it flat? I mean, it just evens itself out. They do about as much at home as they would do at work. Is that what it comes down to?
Yes, it turns out there's kind of offsetting things. So positives of working from home, say 2 days a week, are A, you save a lot of time on commuting. So you literally have more time, you're less tired. And B, it's quieter on average at home.
So less distractions.
Less distractions, exactly. There are a couple of negatives, though, about working from home, which are, firstly, it is harder to mentor, to train. And secondly, it just seems harder to be innovative or creative. So, as an academic, I often go to seminars. They're just not the same on Zoom as they are in person. So hybrid is about zero impact on productivity.
And hybrid is 2 to 3 days a week? Is that what we're...
Yeah, to give you figures, for North America, for Northern Europe, hybrid is about 30% of people. So if you look at typical university grads, managers, professionals, they're in hybrid and they're usually working from home 2 days a week. There's about 10% of people that are fully remote. There's a lot of call centers, data entry, some coders. They tend to actually be slightly lower paid on average. Mm-hmm. And then the remaining 60% of people are fully in person. Food service, or actually surgeons, teachers, huge range of folks. So hybrid is the biggest group of people that work from home, and they normally do, Monday, Friday. Those would be the typical days to work from home.
Right. So now you were saying that it's not just a question of productivity, but profitability. And so how does the profit work out in all of this?
Yeah, so hybrid is phenomenally profitable for firms, even though the impact on productivity is zero, because it's so effective at reducing recruitment and retention costs. So I had a paper in Nature whereby we did a randomized control trial on 1,600 people in IT, finance, marketing, management, accounting in a big tech company, randomized into whether they got to work from home 2 days a week or had to come in every day. And you saw that productivity is about flat, but the quit rates fell by 35% for people that are allowed to work from home 2 days a week.
Right.
When you interviewed them, they're like, why not? We really like avoiding the commute. If I go to pick my kid up from school or go to the dentist or do something, it's much easier. As a result, for the business, the normal figures are when somebody quits, the cost of re-recruiting, re-interviewing, retraining their replacement is roughly half a year's worth of their salary.
Wow.
So the company we were working with said every person that quits costs us about $30,000. If you can reduce quit rates by a third, you're saving the business millions of dollars a year.
Okay. So you've touched on this a little bit, but how about for the employees? I mean, you talk about this as being this sort of great impact on our society, and I'm assuming that a lot of that means it's the employees that are benefiting. Why do people like it so much?
They like it because you're saving an enormous amount of time. So when we've surveyed about 200,000 people now across the US, Europe, Asia, actually all around the world, and what you see is on average, they want to work from home about 2.5 days a week. Not surprisingly, that number's higher. And if you go to Asian cities, take something like Manila, crushing traffic, horrible commutes, you're maybe an hour each way, people that are really keen to work from home. And also for certain subgroups, for example, folks with a disability, it is dramatically better working from home. If you have, say, a back issue, or issues with reading, you need strong light, or, you want to go to the bathroom, for example, regularly, being at home is much more comfortable. So those two factors drive the popularity, at least, of hybrid.
Mm-hmm. Does it have a benefit to companies that you have this group of people who would much prefer to be at home? Does that affect who they employ?
Yes. So I've talked about individual productivity, but there's a second element of what I call labor supply. So there's a number of folks that are marginal on working or not. So imagine, you've got 67, 68, you're thinking about retiring, or you have, young kids, or you live a long way from, say you're out in the countryside, or you have a disability. If you suddenly discover that you can now work from home 2, 3, maybe even 5 days a week, that can really change what you're going to do. And the estimate says this could increase labor supply by a few percent. And as a result, if you enable more people to work, that generates, larger overall economic growth. And it's also good for spreading wealth and development out, for example, into rural areas, because suddenly you can access these great jobs. So there's like the micro impact, which tends to be positive on firms and individuals, but there's also a very big macro impact on the entire economy.
But there's no question that there are some downsides to it. I mean, we see, for example, that in urban, downtown areas, it's had an impact certainly on a lot of businesses to not have so many people coming in. Also, in terms of public transportation, when you don't have ridership. So what about the negative sides?
So yes, there are some negatives. It's a debate about how negative they really are, but we'll just go through. The most obvious is on city centers. So take San Francisco, the biggest city near to me. There are less people going into work every day, so they're spending less in sandwich shops, so less people living there. Real estate is down. Is that a bad thing? It's less obvious, actually, whether that's actually bad. So we know that aggregate spending in the US is actually doing very well. So it's not like they're not spending on sandwiches overall. They're just shifting out to the suburbs.
Buying them out in the suburbs instead.
Yeah, and so Starbucks and Au Bon Pain and Pret a Manger, business is great out in the suburbs. It's down in the city centers. Same thing in terms of where people are living. They've moved out a bit from the city centers. They're living in the suburbs.
But are we heading towards urban decay? Is this going to cause decay downtown, and you don't have the vibrancy that you currently have or have had in the past?
I don't know whether this is good or bad. Again, living out in San Francisco in 2018, 2019, there were big protests. So Google's buses used to have bricks thrown at them, people, attacking them, because it had got so expensive to live in the center of town that frontline workers couldn't afford it. So if you happen to be in the police, the fire, nursing, work in McDonald's, it was just too expensive to live. And so you are now moving, an hour out of the city center and had this horrible commute. So the fact that house prices have gone down, or apartments have gone down in city centers because people have moved out, it's not clear to me that's even a bad thing. So, as an economist, I can see the direction. It's much as obvious what's right and wrong. And certainly living in Silicon Valley, there was a huge debate about affordability in city centers that's now, quietened down because of what's happened.
Okay. So, I did listen to a TED Talk that you did back in 2017. I think it was entitled, "Go Ahead, Tell Your Boss You're Working From Home," which I thought was quite funny. So, as you say, you've been researching this phenomenon for a long time. What was it like trying to put across the benefits of working from home before the pandemic?
So there was deep skepticism.
I bet.
A few, I don't know whether you call them believers or fervents or whatever, but would, into the cause. But mostly people are like, no way.
It must have been amazing to you to see this whole world shift in this very direction that you'd been talking about for years.
Yeah, so honestly, I wasn't pushing that hard. I'd done research on it. I got into it. I was lucky. I'm one of 4 kids. Mm-hmm. Both my parents have worked all the way back. So they would already work from home in the I'm 51. So I remember, I was growing up in the 70s and 80s. They would work from home back then, but it was pretty terrible. It was before personal computers, before the internet. So I was carrying pieces of paper.
Right.
And I always remember that. Even telephone calls are expensive. So I remember, talking to my mum in particular, it's like you feel really cut off. You carry the paper home. You don't really want to spend a lot of time on the phone to the office. So it's very disadvantaged. By the time you get to the 90s, early 2000s, the internet and personal computers have come along. By 2010 was a pretty breakthrough kind of era because you get 2 things that changed everything. One was the cloud. So you can share files, think of Dropbox. And the other was video calls, think of Zoom and Teams.
Of course.
So by the time the pandemic happened, you're actually really well set up to make this a success. I was honestly kind of personally interested, kind of lucky. And yes, it caught even me by surprise. I thought it was better than people expected, but it's turned out just to be so much better. I mean, now in 2024, I often talk to CEOs who are like, why didn't we do this sooner?
Yeah.
I'm like, I don't know. And it's kind of this an equilibrium thing. There's many things going on. But for example, in my old employer, McKinsey, now many of their clients are hybrid. So if you've got a hybrid client and they're not in the office, you can't send the consultants in. And so this and if you're in a sales role, if you're trying to sell to a customer that's, working from home, you don't need to travel. So there is a general equilibrium effect. Another thing that's happened that's quite striking is the technology's got a lot better.
Right.
So given the number of us that are working from home is up about 5-fold, there's suddenly big billions of dollars in markets for better videos, audio, software. And so the speed of technological improvement has really picked up.
I mean, what kind of technology are you referring to there?
Yeah, so some of them are more incremental. So Zoom, for example, is way better. Teams only had 4 windows on the beginning of the pandemic. It then went to 9 fast, then it's gone to 49. Others are big jumps. I'll tell you 2 that I've seen. I'm out in Silicon Valley. One was I was at a dinner for VCs, and one of the companies they founded, they'd given several $1 million to, was working on holograms. The guy said, look, it's not operational yet, but we're getting there. And think of the Jedi Council, whereby you're beamed up and you can talk to each other. So that was one thing.
Wow.
Another thing I actually saw live up and running was these portals. So I went up to a company in San Francisco. They have a portal, which is kind of 12 by 12 foot. It's on the wall. And what happens is it has cameras, multiple cameras in the portal.
Right.
And they have other ones in other locations. And you stand in front of it and you talk to the portal. And they said, I will give you a test. We'll show you one of our co-founders. She's in New York. So I stood there and I was in San Francisco. She was in New York. It was amazing. It was like, you don't think, but on Zoom, you don't see people's trousers, their shoes, their height. You don't see when they turn sideways. So we're having a discussion. And the difference was, if I'd stepped out of that room and passed her on the street 5 minutes later, I would have gone like, Emily, I would have totally recognized her. You kind of felt like you could reach into the screen, like, I've forgotten the name of that TV, Stargate. You could reach into the screen and touch through. You couldn't. But all of these things, they don't make remote as good as in person, but they increasingly shrink the gap in the difference between it.
So is that in the future, or is that operational now?
That is apparently starting to happen now. My guess is in 15, 20 years' time, all of us are going to have like wall-sized screens, probably very thin, that we just roll down the wall, and there's cameras throughout it. So I can just have a discussion with you, and it would just be much more lifelike. So in person may be a little better, but, the gap between in-person and remote will shrink. And it's not like we'll never meet physically, but we'll go from coming to the office maybe 3 days a week to coming in 1 day a week.
So what would you like to study now about this phenomenon? Is there something that you're reaching out to try and understand better about the work-from-home experience?
A really interesting question, very relevant globally, is impact on fertility. So think of much of Asia in particular, where Southern Europe fertility rates are incredibly low, generating real long-run risk to growth, to demographic, all kinds of issues. Imagine that now you can work from home 2-3 days a week. It makes, I have 4 kids, and it's certainly, there's a lot of stuff like later today. I'm at home today, and I go pick, my daughter up. So working from home definitely makes childcare a lot easier. It also makes accommodation easier, because if I only have to go into the office 2 days a week, I can live further away, and maybe I can afford enough space to have a bedroom for my kids or a backyard or whatever it is. So one of the areas I really want to look at is fertility. It's a long-run process because in order for work from home to change fertility, it really has to change people's expectations, their planning. And it wasn't really until 2023, I think, everyone saw this was permanent. So I think of a couple, they're like, in 23, 24, they're confident it's now permanent. They think, okay, maybe let's have an extra kid or let's have a kid. So my guess is we're going to see quite major increases in fertility, which is going to be, I think, for a lot of Asia, Southern Europe, much of the world, actually, that will be a very positive impact.
Well, Nicholas Bloom, I look forward to your future insights into our work from home experience. And I thank you so much for coming on the podcast today.
Breda, thanks so much for having me on.
Nick Bloom is a professor of economics at Stanford University. He was speaking with Rhoda Metcalf. Look for his article, Remote Work's Growth Gift, in the September issue of Finance and Development magazine. And look for other IMF podcasts on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen. You can also follow us on X, what used to be Twitter, at IMF_podcast. I'm Bruce Edwards.
And I'm Rhoda Metcalf. Thanks for listening.